Hello from Mindset Daily, wishing you a day full of health, peace, and happiness. Thank you for watching the Mindset Daily channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support us. Thank you so much. What if being alone wasn't a weakness, but a sign of strength? What if solitude wasn't silence, but preparation? And what if the season you fear most is the one that shapes you the most? People often misunderstand what it really means to be alone. They confuse solitude with suffering. They assume that if no one is standing beside you, something must be wrong with you. But here's the truth. Some of the most powerful, transformative seasons of your life will be the ones where you walk alone. Not because you're broken, not because you've been forgotten, but because God is setting you apart, pulling you away from distractions to prepare you for something greater. Sometimes, in order to get you ready for what's ahead, He has to remove what's around you. Being alone isn't punishment. It's a process. It's a season of refinement, not rejection. We live in a world that celebrates being constantly surrounded by people, attention, validation. We're told that the more followers we have, the louder the applause, the more valuable we must be. But heaven doesn't measure worth that way. In fact, some of your greatest breakthroughs won't come when everyone's celebrating your name. They'll come in the moments when no one even knows your name, but God does. Think about it. Before Jesus stepped into his divine calling, he went into the wilderness alone. Before David wore the crown, he was tending sheep in forgotten fields alone. Before Joseph ruled over Egypt, he was sitting in a prison cell alone. And yet, in those unseen, uncelebrated places, something sacred was taking place. Their character was being forged. Their trust in God was being tested. Their identity wasn't being built in front of a crowd. It was being refined in the quiet, in the stillness, in the solitude. We often pray for the spotlight, but God sometimes whispers, "Let me hide you for a while." Because it's in that hidden place where we learn to hear His voice without distraction. It's in the silence where He removes the pressure to perform, the noise of other people's opinions, and the illusion that we need anyone but Him to feel whole. God brings you into solitude not to break you, but to build you. He removes the noise so you can hear what truly matters. In the quiet, you learn to stand, not on popularity, not on applause, but on purpose. And when it feels like you're all alone, you're not. Because even in the silence, God is near. He walks with you when no one else stays. He speaks when every other voice has faded. And in those sacred moments, something powerful begins to happen. You realize that knowing who you are apart from everyone else is one of the greatest strengths you could ever carry. You stop needing constant validation. You stop craving the approval of the crowd. You stop chasing surface-level connections just to fill a lonely space. Because now you're rooted in something real. You're anchored in the one who created you. And here's the thing. There's a reason a seed is buried in darkness before it ever breaks through to the light. It's not punishment. It's preparation. A seed must take root before it can bear fruit. Without that hidden season, it can't survive the weight of what's coming. If it sprouts too early, it withers. If it's exposed before it's grounded, it falls. And yet so many of us are asking God for fruit when we haven't allowed Him to develop our roots. We're praying for the spotlight, the platform, the breakthrough, while skipping the process that makes us strong enough to carry it. But God, in His love, withholds what we're not ready to hold. Not to punish us, but to protect us. He knows that promotion without preparation leads to collapse. So if you're in a season of solitude, don't rush through it. Don't despise it. Don't overlook those days when it's just you, your thoughts, your faith, your doubts, your fears. Because that's exactly where transformation is taking place. That's where your spiritual muscle is being built. That's where you become strong enough to carry what God is preparing to place in your hands. That's where true healing begins. You don't need a room full of people clapping for you to know your worth. Because when you know who you are in God's presence, even the silence speaks purpose. Sometimes, all it takes is one whisper from heaven, just one gentle assurance that says, "I'm with you." And let me tell you, when God is with you, it truly doesn't matter who isn't. When you're being held in His hands, the ones who let go of yours fade into irrelevance. God's not raising you in public to win applause. He's building you in private for something far greater, purpose. He's setting you apart not because you're lacking, not because you're forgotten, but because you're chosen. And if you can stay faithful, faithful in the silence, in the lonely moments, in the places no one else sees. You will come out of this season stronger, wiser, and prepared for what's next. Some of your most sacred victories will never be seen on a stage. They'll happen when no one is clapping, when no one is watching. Because solitude is not your prison, it's your preparation. There's something powerful that begins to unfold when the noise dies down, when the phone stops ringing, when the text messages stop lighting up your screen, when the people you once leaned on slowly drift out of your daily life. At first, it feels like loss. It feels like abandonment. It feels like you've been left alone in a room with nothing but your own voice. And for many, that can be the scariest sound in the world. But that quiet, trembling voice deep inside, the one you've been trying to ignore for years, is the very one that holds the truth you've been running from. And maybe, just maybe, this season of being alone isn't really about who left. Maybe it's about who you were always meant to become. Because when the world grows quiet, that's when the real conversations begin. Not the ones you have with friends or family, but the ones you finally have with yourself. For far too long, many of us have let others do the talking for us. We've lived our lives trying to meet expectations that were never ours. We've moved to rhythms that never matched our own heartbeat. We've dressed in opinions that never fit quite right. We've spoken in tones that didn't sound like truth. And we've chased dreams that were handed to us, not born in us. But when you're truly alone, when all the noise falls away, you begin to notice the difference. The difference between who the world told you to be and who God created you to be. That voice you've been ignoring? It's not weak. It's just been buried under layers of doubt, disappointment, distraction, and years of second-guessing yourself. But now, in the stillness, something powerful is happening. The silence is doing its work. It's beginning to stir that voice back to life. And slowly, almost quietly, you begin to recognize something you may have forgotten. Your voice was never truly lost. It didn't disappear. It was simply crowded out, buried beneath the noise of the crowd, the weight of others' opinions, the expectations of society, and the fear that somehow you just weren't enough. But now, here you are, without the noise. And for the first time in a long time, you can actually hear. And what you hear isn't confusion. It isn't fear. It's something far deeper. You hear truth. You hear conviction. You hear calling. That voice. That's you. The real you. This is the season where God is teaching you something sacred. How to stop outsourcing your worth. How to stop begging people to notice you, understand you, approve of you, or validate your existence. He's pulling you back to a place where their applause no longer defines your identity. A place where your own voice, rooted in truth, begins to matter more than their opinions ever did. It's the season where your soul becomes your sanctuary. And when you begin to speak from that place, not to the world, but to yourself, that's when the healing begins. That's where change is born. That's where power starts to take root. You've got to start speaking to yourself like someone who's going somewhere. Like someone with a future. Someone with vision. Someone with purpose. Speak over yourself with grace, with boldness, and with faith. Stop repeating the things they said about you. Stop carrying their criticism like it's your truth. Stop letting their doubts live rent-free in your spirit. Ask yourself this: what did God say? What have you heard in the quiet, when it was just you and Him? That's the voice you follow. That's the voice that matters. Because no one can affirm you like the Holy Spirit can. No one can validate your worth like heaven can. And when that voice, God's voice within you, starts to rise above the rest, something begins to shift. Not just around you, but inside you. You begin to walk differently. Not with arrogance, but with assurance. You start making decisions from a place of peace. Not pressure, not fear, not obligation. You begin to say no to the things that once pulled you in the wrong direction, and yes to the calling that used to intimidate you. And you're not doing it because someone told you to. You're doing it because you heard it in your soul. You believed it. You received it. And when you finally find your voice, your true voice, you stop trying to squeeze into spaces that were never meant for you. You stop shrinking yourself just to make other people feel more comfortable. You stop letting insecurity define who you are. Because your voice, it reminds you of what you carry. It speaks truth even when no one else does. It tells you that even if no one claps for you, you're still chosen. Even if people leave, you're still worthy. Even if the door you prayed for closes, God is still opening another one. Your voice keeps you grounded when the world tries to shake you. It reminds you that you're not being punished, you're being formed. There's clarity that comes in solitude. There's strength that rises from stillness. And there's revelation that only comes through silence. So don't waste this season. Don't rush through it just to get to the next thing. Don't drown it out with noise just because silence feels uncomfortable. Because this quiet space is where confidence starts to grow. This is where courage is born. This is where your real future begins to take shape. When you finally start listening to the voice within, the one that's always known the way, you'll wonder why you ever doubted it. That voice, that's your breakthrough. When you're left alone with nothing but your thoughts, when the distractions fade, and it's just you in the stillness, something powerful begins to happen. Not on the outside, but deep within. Something real, something eternal. You finally begin to hear your own voice. For so long, you've been conditioned to tune in to the voices of others, seeking approval, trying to fit in, conforming to molds that were never made for you. You've learned how to silence your own instincts just to meet expectations that were placed on you by people who didn't even know the real you. But in the quiet, in that sacred solitude, something deeper begins to rise to the surface. A truth you may have forgotten. You begin to realize that the voice you've been following all this time, it wasn't even yours. It was the noise of the world, the opinions, the pressure, the expectations. And the voice you've been ignoring, the one buried beneath all the noise, is your true voice. This isn't just about speaking to yourself. It's about learning to listen. We've spent so much of our lives trying to measure up, trying to earn love, prove our worth, please everyone around us, all while chasing a standard that keeps moving just out of reach. But when you're left alone with yourself, when the outside demands fade, you begin to hear something far more significant. You hear the voice inside, the one that reminds you not of who the world says you should be, but of who you truly are. The voice that speaks truth over you, the kind of truth that echoes God's heart for you. Not the lies, not the labels, but the identity He placed in you from the beginning. And in those quiet moments, something shifts. You realize that your voice isn't weak. It's not insignificant. It's not lacking. In fact, it's the most important voice you'll ever hear, because it's the one that's been with you all along. The one that knows the way forward. The one that will lead you into your purpose, even when you can't fully see it yet. This is the voice that will call you out of darkness and into light. The voice that knows the strength in you even when you feel tired. The voice that speaks hope even when you feel broken. And when you finally begin to listen, truly listen, you won't just hear noise. You'll hear clarity. You'll hear courage. You'll hear truth. Because in a world full of noise, it's easy to forget the power of a quiet moment. But if you lean in, if you dare to sit in the silence, you might just discover that God often speaks the loudest when everything else grows still. It's in the stillness, those rare, quiet moments, when we become most receptive to hearing the whispers that truly matter. And as we begin to truly listen, we realize something powerful. The voice we've been desperately searching for out there, in the noise, in the opinions of others, in the chaos of constant comparison. It's actually been within us all along. That gentle, steady voice, it's the voice of God. It's your voice, now aligned with His purpose. It's been waiting patiently, buried under years of striving and fear, covered by your attempts to meet everyone else's expectations. Why have we been running from it? Maybe because we were too afraid of what we might hear. Maybe we thought rejection was safer than authenticity. Maybe we were taught to silence that voice in favor of fitting in. But the moment you finally pause, when you breathe, when you lean in, you start to remember, no one knows you more intimately than you know yourself. And no one can call out your destiny more clearly than the one who created you in the first place. So let me ask you this. What have you been telling yourself? What kind of story have you been rehearsing in your mind for years? Have you been living in agreement with truth, or just surviving under the weight of other people's noise? Have the opinions of others become louder than the vision placed in your heart? The reality is, many of us have been living under a script we didn't write. We've let labels define us. We've let doubt decide our next steps. We've let comparison limit our courage. But something powerful happens when you start to listen to the voice inside, your true voice. The one that says, you are more than their opinions. You are not what they said. You are not their version of you. You are who God says you are. And this is where transformation begins. Because when you listen to your own voice, you begin to speak with clarity, with confidence, with conviction. You stop chasing validation because deep down, you already know your value. You stop shrinking to fit in because you've learned to stand tall in who you are. You begin to speak life into your future, not because others believe in you, but because you finally believe in yourself. You begin to speak truth into the lies that once kept you bound. You start calling out the fears that used to paralyze you and speak courage directly into their face. And here's the shift. Once your voice finds that kind of power, that kind of authority, you no longer sit around waiting for someone to give you permission. You don't wait for someone to hand you a platform or validate your voice. You take the microphone. You claim your place. You become the one who leads your life instead of being led by noise. And it's in that moment of clarity that you realize the voice you've been resisting, yes, the one you kept quiet for so long, is the very voice carrying your calling. It holds your direction. It holds your freedom. It's not just any voice. It's the voice of your true self, the one God created before the world tried to reshape you. The world has always had something to say about who you should be. Louder, quieter, stronger, softer, more this, less that. But now you see you have a choice. You get to decide who you'll listen to. Will it be the expectations of the crowd, or the voice within that's been quietly aligning with the divine calling over your life? You can choose to follow what's real, what's eternal. You can choose to honor the voice that knows your path, even when others don't understand it. So don't fear the silence. Don't resist those moments when it's just you and your thoughts echoing in an empty room. Because in that space, in that sacred stillness, you are closer to your truest self than you've ever been. That voice within you, it's not weak. It's not small. In fact, it's the strongest force guiding your future. It's the compass God placed inside you. And once you begin speaking from that deep place of conviction, where your identity and your words are finally aligned, something incredible happens. Obstacles start to lose their power. Doubt begins to quiet. Fear no longer runs the show. When you speak from your truth, rooted in purpose, the noise of the world fades. And that voice, your voice, starts to move things. Because one of the greatest revelations you'll ever come to in this life is this. People can compliment you. They can admire you. They can even celebrate you. But only God can complete you. That might sound simple, but once it settles in your spirit, it shifts everything. You stop chasing affirmation like it's your oxygen. You stop defining your value by what others give you or take away. For far too long, many of us have believed that our worth was tied to our relationships, how people treat us, how many followers we have, what we've accomplished, or what titles we carry. But here's the truth. None of those external things, not applause, not titles, not even relationships, can truly satisfy the deepest parts of your soul unless you first understand this. Only God can complete you. If your fulfillment depends on people's approval, on their praise or presence, you're building your identity on shifting sand. People are imperfect. They change. They leave. They forget. And sometimes they just don't recognize your worth. So what happens when they walk away? What happens when their applause fades? If your sense of value is tied to their perception, you'll constantly chase affirmation like a mirage, close enough to see, but never close enough to touch. But when your identity is grounded in something unshakable, when it's rooted in God's truth about who you are, you find a strength that doesn't depend on anyone else. You stop living for validation and start living from it. Now, let's be clear. I'm not saying that relationships don't matter. I'm not saying we weren't created for connection or that love and companionship aren't beautiful, essential parts of life. Of course they are. But here's the key. You can't pour into someone else until you've been filled yourself. You can't offer real love if you're still trying to earn love. Before you give your heart away, you need to give it to the one who made it. Because only God sees every corner of your soul. Only He understands the quiet fears you've never said out loud, the desires you've buried, the dreams you're too afraid to chase. And when you let Him fill those places, those hidden, aching, sacred spaces, you stop needing someone else to complete you. You start realizing you were already whole in Him. That's when everything shifts. That's when you become a vessel of love instead of a seeker of approval. You no longer crave from others what only God can give. And in that freedom, you start to give love generously, without fear, without conditions, without losing yourself in the process. There is an unshakable peace that comes from knowing you're already complete. And it's that peace that frees you from the fears so many live with. The fear of being alone, the fear of not being chosen, the fear of never finding the one. But when you walk closely with God, you realize something beautiful. You were never truly alone to begin with. He's always been with you, even in the silence. His love isn't based on your resume or your reputation. It doesn't shift with your performance. It isn't earned, it's given. Freely, fully, faithfully. And when you finally let that kind of love fill you, deeply, completely, you stop chasing. You stop fearing. And you start becoming the person you were always meant to be. You no longer feel the need to search for love in the wrong places. You stop trying to fill the emptiness in your heart with temporary connections or shallow affection. The constant longing for someone else to complete you begins to fade. Why? Because you're finally grounded, not in the opinions of others, but in the truth of who God says you are. And that truth changes everything. You stop settling for relationships that drain you or distort your worth. You stop bending over backward to please people who were never meant to understand your soul. And something remarkable happens. You begin to attract people who truly see you. People who aren't drawn to a version of you that's curated to fit in, but to the authentic, unfiltered version of who you really are. When you allow God to be the one who completes you, there's no longer a need to prove anything. You don't need to hustle for attention. You don't need to keep chasing someone else's definition of success. You're free to walk confidently, knowing that you are deeply loved, fully accepted, and uniquely designed with divine purpose. And that's the beauty of God's love. It doesn't simply patch up the broken parts of you. It rebuilds you. It restores what was lost, mends what was torn, and brings strength to every place that once felt like weakness. It doesn't just fill the gaps. It makes you whole in a way no human relationship ever could. But the enemy will try to convince you otherwise. He wants you to stay stuck in that cycle, constantly chasing approval, endlessly performing, trying to earn love that was never meant to be earned. He wants you to believe that you have to be perfect to be worthy, that you must impress to be seen. But that is a lie. The truth is, God already sees you. And He loves you, not for who you pretend to be, not for what you accomplish, but for exactly who you are, right here, right now. So stop running after people who make you feel like you're not enough. Stop handing your value to those who don't know how to hold it. The right person won't complete you. They'll complement the wholeness you already have in God. Their love won't become your identity. It will be a reflection of the love that has already defined you. When you're truly complete in Him, you stop searching for validation in places that were never meant to satisfy your soul. You no longer chase after temporary approval or settle for anything less than God's very best for your life. His love doesn't just fill you for your own healing. It overflows so you can pour into others. You become a wellspring of encouragement, a steady presence of peace, and a light of joy in the lives of those around you. You stop living under the weight of fear, the kind that whispers, "You're not enough." That quiet, constant questioning starts to fade. You begin to walk in the boldness of knowing who you are in Christ. Loved, chosen, whole. And when that truth finally clicks, not just in your mind, but deep in your spirit, the burden of needing someone else to complete you begins to lift. You start to breathe easier, smile freer, because when you know that you are already whole in Him, you stop chasing things to fill the void. You start resting in the peace He gives, the joy He sustains, and the purpose He's written over your life. These aren't things that can be taken away by people, lost to circumstances, or defined by external achievements. They are anchored in eternity. One of the most freeing revelations you'll ever embrace is this: your happiness does not have to be tied to someone else. Too often, we grow up with the idea that we need someone to make us feel complete. We buy into the myth that happiness comes from finding the right person who will fix what's broken, fill what's lacking, and give us a reason to smile again. But here's the truth: real, deep, lasting happiness is something that flows from within. And that's why learning to be happy alone is not just a season, it's a gift. It's one of the most empowering things you will ever do for yourself. Because when your joy is anchored in God and cultivated in your own soul, no one can take it from you. If your happiness depends on someone else's presence, behavior, or approval, what happens when they change? What happens when they walk away? What happens when the relationship you thought was forever suddenly isn't? People are imperfect. Relationships evolve. Seasons shift. But when your joy is rooted in the unchanging love of God, you can stand firm, even when everything else feels uncertain. But when you learn to find your joy within, when it comes from your own relationship with God, from your growing awareness of who you are, then no matter what happens around you, you remain steady. You're no longer waiting for someone else to complete you because you've already been made whole in Him. You're not constantly chasing a sense of purpose in someone else's story because you've already discovered the meaning written into your own. You no longer depend on external circumstances to measure your happiness. Why? Because your joy now flows from a deeper, unshakable source, a place untouched by the highs and lows of life, a place that doesn't shift with the seasons or break with disappointment. And that, my friend, is where true freedom begins. It's the kind of freedom that lets you live boldly, fully, and without fear. You're no longer bound by the anxiety of losing people or missing out. You're free to just be confident, grounded, whole. Let's be honest, though, many of us have spent years afraid of being alone. We've been conditioned to believe that solitude is something to be avoided. Society whispers that being alone means you've failed, that no one chose you, that you're not enough. But today, I want to gently challenge that lie. Being alone doesn't mean being lonely. It doesn't mean you're forgotten or unworthy of love. In fact, it can be one of the most sacred seasons of your life. Being alone gives you the space to reconnect with your inner self, to sit with your thoughts, to recognize your longings, and above all, to deepen your relationship with God. Isn't it amazing how clearly we begin to hear when the world grows quiet? When you spend intentional time in solitude, you begin to rediscover the version of yourself that's been hiding beneath the noise of the world. You no longer have to wear the masks you've been pressured to wear. You start shedding the labels others gave you and begin embracing the truth of who God says you are. It's in those quiet spaces that you're finally able to ask the deeper questions. Who am I, really? What do I desire most in this life? What has God placed inside of me that I've been too distracted to notice? And most importantly, what does it truly mean to walk in His purpose, even when no one else understands it? Being alone offers you the clarity and the courage to wrestle with those questions. It gives you the sacred space to reflect, to grow, and to walk forward, not with uncertainty, but with renewed strength and vision. And when you truly know who you are, when you're fully at peace in your own presence, that's when something powerful happens. You begin to experience a kind of peace that no external applause can offer. It's not the kind that depends on how many people approve of you, or how well you meet society's expectations. No, it's much deeper. It's the kind of peace that comes from within, the kind that flows from knowing, without a doubt, that you are already enough, exactly as you are. You don't need someone to constantly tell you your worth, because God has already declared it. You've already been seen, chosen, and validated by the one who created you. And in that sacred solitude, something else begins to happen: healing. Without the distractions of noise or comparison, you gain space to reflect. You're finally able to face those past wounds, the mistakes you regret, the disappointments you've buried, the heartbreaks you never had time to process. It's in this quiet, honest space that you begin to forgive, not just others, but yourself. You stop carrying what was never meant to weigh you down. You make room in your heart, not just for healing, but for growth. You see, God never intended for you to rely on others to bring you happiness. His plan was always for you to find your deepest joy in Him, in who He's made you to be, and in the purpose He's written uniquely for your life. The world might try to convince you that you need another person to feel complete, to feel valued, to feel loved. But that's simply not true. The truth is, you are already whole. You are already loved, deeply, unconditionally. You are already complete in Him. And when that truth finally sinks in, when it moves from just words in your head to truth in your soul, it sets you free. Free from striving. Free from needing others to define your worth. Free from the fear of being alone. This doesn't mean you won't desire connection. It doesn't mean you won't long for real, meaningful relationships. But it does mean you won't settle. You won't allow just anyone to fill the empty places that only God was meant to occupy. You'll stop searching for someone to complete you, because you've already discovered that you are whole. You'll stop letting your joy rise and fall on the actions of others. And that shift changes everything. Because when your heart is whole, when your joy is rooted in truth, you begin to attract something different. You draw in healthy, life-giving relationships, connections built not on neediness, but on mutual respect, shared love, and real growth. So stop waiting for someone else to give you permission to be happy. You don't need another person's nod of approval to feel worthy. You don't need someone to validate your presence or tell you that you're enough, because you already are. Right now, just as you are, without the performance, without the striving, you are enough. God has already called you his own. He has already spoken over your life, declaring that you are chosen, you are loved, and you are equipped for joy and peace. When you finally learn to be happy alone, something shifts deep within. You stop depending on others to fill the gaps in your soul. You stop waiting for external affirmation to feel secure. Instead, you begin to realize that the only one you truly need to rely on is God. And in that realization, there's power. When you rest in his love and fully trust his plan for your life, then no person, no setback, no uncertain season can take your joy away. Because you've found the source, and that source is eternal. God's love is not a temporary fix. It's not seasonal or conditional. It's steady, it's overflowing, and it never runs dry. You see, learning to be happy alone doesn't just free you from the fear of being by yourself. It unlocks the door to something greater, the discovery of your inner strength, your divine identity, and your untapped potential. There's something profoundly empowering about standing on your own 2 feet, facing the world not with fear, but with quiet confidence. And that confidence doesn't come from who's standing beside you. It comes from who lives within you, and what he has placed inside of you. In those moments of solitude, when you're no longer leaning on anyone else for strength, you start to recognize just how much you carry. You begin to see your purpose not through the lens of other people's expectations, but through the clarity that only stillness can bring. For far too long, many of us have tied our worth to what we do for others. We've believed our value comes from how much we give, how much we serve, how much we produce. We've been taught that sacrificing ourselves for relationships, for families, for careers is the only path to meaning. But what if your value isn't measured by what you do, but simply by who you are? But when you finally learn to stand on your own 2 feet, something beautiful begins to unfold. You discover that your worth has never been tied to what you can do for others. It's not about how much you give, how much you serve, or how much approval you collect. Your worth is grounded in who you are, in the unique, irreplaceable person God designed you to be from the beginning. When you spend time alone, you're given the opportunity to turn inward, not in a self-centered way, but in a necessary, soul-searching way. It becomes a sacred invitation to pause and ask, who am I really? You begin to realize that before you can show up fully in any relationship or give yourself meaningfully to any purpose, you first need to know yourself. You need to understand your own voice, your needs, your desires, and the calling God has placed on your life. Too many people spend their lives jumping from one relationship to the next, one job to another, one goal to the next milestone, never stopping long enough to ask the most foundational question, who am I when no one else is around? And that's where the quiet, often misunderstood gift of being alone comes into play. It's in the solitude where the deepest revelations happen. You get the time and the mental clarity to reconnect with the dreams you once tucked away. You rediscover what excites your soul, what fuels your passion, and what makes you feel fully alive. You remember the things you used to love before life got loud. You start uncovering the parts of you that were buried under the weight of expectations, obligations, or the need to please others. This journey of rediscovery transforms how you see everything. When you finally get clear on who you are and what truly matters to you, the world starts to look different. You no longer let your value rise or fall with the opinions of others. You stop obsessing over whether people accept or reject you. Why? Because you're no longer chasing after temporary validation. You've already found lasting affirmation in your identity with God. And once that truth settles in your heart, you begin to see how much of your past anxiety, your striving, and your insecurity were rooted in a misunderstanding of your own value. Now, you walk with purpose. You live with direction. You rise each day with a quiet strength. Not because life is perfect, but because you finally know who you are. You understand that you were never meant to live for the fleeting applause of others. You're living for something eternal, a calling that can't be taken away, a mission that can't be muted by rejection. That's the real power of learning to be happy alone. Not because you've given up on connection, but because you've finally connected to yourself and to God in a way that can't be shaken. You begin to recognize that your worth and your purpose were never meant to be defined by anyone else. Not by friends, not by family, not by society. They were determined long ago by the one who created you. You were handcrafted for a purpose, uniquely equipped and divinely prepared to fulfill a calling that only you can walk out. No one else can step into your shoes. No one else can carry your exact assignment or experience the specific joy, challenges, and breakthroughs that God has woven into your journey. And when that truth begins to settle in your heart, not just as an idea, but as a conviction, you rise with a new kind of confidence. It's not arrogance. It's not pride. It's the quiet strength of knowing who you are and whose you are. You stop looking outward for validation because you've already been validated by the one who matters most. You don't wait for anyone to open the door for you because you understand that the door God opens, no one can shut. You stop asking for permission to chase the dreams that have been burning in your heart. You no longer wonder if you're good enough or ready in the eyes of others because deep down, you know God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. And you're called. As you continue walking in that confidence, something incredible begins to happen. Your vision sharpens. You start seeing doors where there used to be walls. You begin stepping into opportunities you would have once backed away from. You take bolder steps, not because the fear is gone, but because your faith has grown stronger. You make choices that align with your purpose, even if they don't please everyone. You stop bending to fit into places where you were never meant to belong. You stop shrinking to make others comfortable. Instead, you move with purpose. You speak with clarity. You live with conviction. You begin to realize that this confidence isn't about ego, it's about alignment. When your steps match your calling, when your voice echoes your purpose, and when your heart beats in rhythm with God's design for you, that's when your life begins to shine. That's when you start living not just for today, but for eternity. But it doesn't end there. As you continue growing into this deeper understanding of who you are, something powerful begins to shift. You start attracting the right people. People who genuinely respect you, who recognize your authenticity, and who value the quiet strength that comes from being secure in your own identity. These aren't just surface-level connections. These are people who uplift you, who challenge you to become better, and who walk beside you, not out of need, but out of shared vision and mutual respect. You begin to realize that meaningful relationships aren't about finding someone to fix your broken pieces or fill the gaps in your life. Instead, they're about sharing your journey with someone who complements the person God has already shaped you to be. There's no longer pressure to impress or perform. There's simply a peace that comes from being known, seen, and loved for exactly who you are. This journey of learning to be happy alone is not about shutting people out. It's not about retreating from the world or rejecting connection. It's about understanding that your wholeness was never meant to be completed by someone else. It's about knowing that you are already enough, already complete, and already walking in purpose. Not because of who's standing beside you, but because of who's dwelling within you. You start to walk differently, speak differently, and make choices from a place of confidence, not insecurity. You cultivate a relationship with yourself and with God that becomes the foundation for everything else in your life. And from that foundation, every step you take begins to feel more intentional, more peaceful, more aligned with who you truly are. So take the time to truly get to know yourself. Don't rush through the solitude. Embrace it. Let it reveal your worth, your strength, and your calling. Because when you stop chasing validation and start living from a place of wholeness, that's when real joy shows up. That's when you begin to live with freedom, purpose, and the quiet confidence that you are exactly who you were always meant to be. Wishing you peace, happiness, and a heart full of strength. And don't forget to subscribe to Mindset Daily for more inspiration. Stay well and stay true to yourself.